Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that Rome never fell and its empire survived into the modern world. But for that future to exist, one moment in history had to change. In 476, the last Western emperor traditionally recognized by historians, Romulus Augustulus, was removed from power. But Rome did not simply vanish. Its institutions, armies, cities, laws, and people continued in different forms. In the East, the Roman Empire survived for centuries, proving that Roman government itself was not doomed to disappear. So what if the West had survived too? Our alternate Rome begins with reform, not conquest. Rome restructures its army, integrating allied warriors instead of allowing military power to drift outside imperial control. Along the Rhine, commanders rebuild forts, secure supply lines, and negotiate new settlements with neighboring peoples. The frontier becomes less a wall and more a system for absorbing outsiders into Roman power. Inside the empire, taxation is simplified, corruption is punished, and provinces regain incentives to produce wealth. Grain from North Africa continues feeding the cities, while Mediterranean trade remains the empire's economic bloodstream. The Mediterranean remains what Romans had always imagined it to be, an internal sea. But armies alone cannot save Rome. The empire needs something it has repeatedly lacked: stable succession. The emperor becomes less a battlefield prize and more the head of a permanent political system. The Senate survives, but its role changes, becoming an institutional counterweight to imperial power. Christianity remains central, but Roman religious identity becomes increasingly intertwined with imperial citizenship. By the 6th century, this Rome is no longer the Rome of Augustus. It is something stranger. Roman institutions governing a society that has become increasingly multicultural. And that changes the entire trajectory of Europe. Instead of abandoning infrastructure, the surviving empire invests in roads, bridges, ports, and defensive corridors. Every repaired road strengthens trade, taxation, and military mobility at the same time. Roman engineering evolves because the state still has a reason to build. Cities remain expensive, but now their survival is politically valuable. Ports connect Italy with Africa, Spain, Gaul, Greece, and the Eastern Mediterranean. Roman merchants therefore inherit something medieval Europe historically lost: a powerful political network spanning the Mediterranean. North Africa remains one of the empire's agricultural powerhouses. Grain, olive oil, and other goods move through imperial ports under Roman protection. A stable currency strengthens long-distance trade. Imperial mints operate across the Mediterranean, reinforcing both commerce and political identity. And education becomes another tool of survival. Latin remains the administrative language across much of the Western provinces. Greek and Latin intellectual traditions continue developing inside one connected Roman world. Texts that might otherwise disappear remain copied, debated, and preserved. Classical knowledge, therefore, has a stronger institutional home. But survival does not guarantee scientific revolution. Technology still depends on incentives, institutions, energy, and accumulated knowledge. Rome might become more innovative, but there is no reason to assume it would suddenly invent modern technology. The alternate future must remain plausible, not magical. And Rome's greatest advantage is not one invention, it is continuity. Now imagine Europe without the political vacuum created by the collapse of Western imperial government. Gaul develops inside a Roman political framework rather than becoming dominated by successor kingdoms. Britannia becomes an even more fascinating possibility. If Rome can finance the frontier, Roman administration could remain influential across Britain for much longer. Cities develop around roads, ports, and military centres rather than collapsing into smaller regional networks. A stronger Roman navy could also make the North Sea a strategic frontier. Rome would face new enemies, new climates, and new economic challenges. Some neighbouring peoples would fight Rome, others would bargain with it, and some would eventually become Roman citizens. That process was already visible in late Roman history, where non-Roman soldiers could become deeply embedded in imperial structures. In our alternate timeline, integration becomes policy rather than emergency. The army becomes an institution capable of turning outsiders into insiders. Citizenship becomes one of Rome's most powerful weapons. Because empires survive when people believe joining them is better than destroying them. By the 8th century, our Rome could be less a conquering empire and more a Roman commonwealth. Provincial governments gain autonomy while recognizing imperial authority. Local elites compete for influence inside the Roman system instead of outside it. Political continuity encourages commercial continuity. And commercial continuity changes how Europe develops. The medieval world begins to look less fragmented and much more Mediterranean. Centuries pass, Rome changes because nothing survives for 1,000 years by remaining exactly the same. Temples become churches, fortresses become administrative centers, ancient roads become commercial arteries. Roman identity becomes increasingly Christian, imperial, and regional at the same time. Latin itself evolves, but imperial institutions keep it politically important. When printing arrives, Roman administrative culture gives the new technology enormous reach. Books spread across a political network already connected by roads and institutions. The Renaissance, if it still happens, would happen inside a different political world. Europe would not rediscover Rome because Rome would still be there. Imagine that difference. Roman universities might claim an unbroken intellectual tradition stretching back to antiquity. Roman constitutional traditions could evolve through centuries of political conflict. An emperor might remain, or the institution might gradually become ceremonial. By the modern age, Rome could resemble an enormous constitutional federation, or it could remain an authoritarian empire. That uncertainty is the most important part of the thought experiment. Political institutions do not automatically become democratic simply because an empire survives. Power still depends on who controls the army, the treasury, and the state. And Rome's military tradition could become both its greatest strength and its greatest danger. A powerful army protects the empire, but it can also decide who rules it. Now take the thought experiment all the way to the 21st century. Rome is no longer an ancient city surrounded by ruins. It is a living capital where ancient architecture and modern engineering coexist. High-speed rail follows corridors whose origins reach back to Roman roads. Modern ports still connect Mediterranean markets. A Roman currency circulates across a vast economic federation. Roman citizenship has become an identity shared by millions of people from different regions and cultures. Latin survives in government and education, while local languages continue beside it. Roman institutions sponsor science, engineering, and exploration. And perhaps the Roman eagle eventually leaves Earth. Not because Rome was destined to conquer space, but because every civilization eventually adapts to the technology around it. Yet the most important difference would not be technological. It would be psychological. Imagine growing up believing your political civilization has never truly ended. History would feel less like a collection of ruins and more like an unbroken inheritance. But continuity has a price. A civilization that survives for centuries can preserve not only its achievements, but its inequalities. An immortal Rome could still face rebellion, inequality, nationalism, corruption, and political violence. Survival would not make Rome perfect. It would simply give Rome more time to become something else. So perhaps the real question is not what Rome would have conquered. The real question is this: if Rome had never fallen, would we still recognize the world we live in? But to understand just how different this world could become, we have to go back to the moment when Rome was under the greatest pressure. The empire was not facing a single enemy or a single disaster. It was facing a combination of problems that had been building for generations. Political instability weakened the center. Military commanders gained enormous influence. Tax burdens strained provinces. Borders became harder to defend. And populations that Rome had once viewed as outsiders were increasingly becoming part of the Roman military and political world. In our alternate timeline, Roman leaders recognize the danger before the system breaks apart completely. Instead of trying to restore the empire exactly as it existed centuries earlier, they accept that Rome must evolve. The old system of governing an enormous territory from a distant imperial court is gradually replaced by something more flexible. Provinces receive greater responsibility, local leaders gain authority, military commanders are given clearer limits, and the emperor becomes the symbol holding the entire system together. This decision creates a very different kind of Roman Empire. It is no longer simply a Mediterranean superpower. It becomes a civilization capable of absorbing change without destroying itself. A Germanic warrior can become a Roman general. A provincial governor can become an imperial statesman. A merchant from North Africa can conduct business across Gaul. A scholar from Greece can teach students in Italy. Roman identity becomes less about where someone was born and more about the institutions they belong to. And that could transform Europe. In our timeline, the centuries after the Western Roman collapse produced a patchwork of kingdoms and political systems. In this alternate world, many of those emerging powers develop inside the Roman framework instead. The Franks might become a powerful Roman province. Visigothic leaders might become hereditary military governors. Britain might remain connected to the continental economy. Iberia might develop as one of the empire's wealthiest western regions. But this does not mean everyone peacefully accepts Roman rule. There would still be wars. There would still be rebellions. There would still be ambitious generals who believe they deserve the imperial throne. There would still be provinces that want independence. Rome's survival would not eliminate conflict. It would simply change the arena in which that conflict takes place. Imagine a rebellion in Gaul. Instead of creating a completely independent kingdom, the rebels might demand greater provincial autonomy. Imagine a powerful military commander in Britain challenging the emperor. His soldiers might still fight beneath Roman standards, even while fighting against another Roman army. The question would no longer be whether Rome survives, but which version of Rome wins. And that is where the alternate history becomes truly fascinating. Because once an empire survives for several additional centuries, its institutions begin to develop in unexpected directions. The Senate could become more powerful, provincial assemblies could gain influence, military leaders could be forced to negotiate with civilian authorities. The emperor could gradually lose direct control over everyday government while retaining enormous symbolic importance. Eventually, Rome might discover something that many ancient empires struggled to achieve, a way to transfer political power without destroying the state. If that happened, the Roman system could slowly evolve toward constitutional government. But another possibility exists. The opposite could happen. The military could become even more powerful. Emperors could rely on loyal armies to suppress political opponents. Provincial populations could become subjects rather than citizens. The empire could survive physically while becoming increasingly authoritarian. So there is no single inevitable Roman future. There are many, and every decision creates another branch. Now consider religion. Christianity would remain one of the most powerful forces shaping Roman civilization. But in a surviving empire, the relationship between church and state could become even more complicated. Bishops would possess enormous influence. Emperors would claim responsibility for defending Christian society. Religious disagreements could become political conflicts. Instead of a Europe divided among many independent kingdoms, imagine a Roman world where religious debates unfold inside one enormous political structure. A theological dispute in Alexandria could become an imperial crisis in Rome. A church council in Constantinople could influence laws across Europe. A disagreement over doctrine could move armies. Religion would not simply be a matter of belief, it could become a matter of state power. And then there is language. If Roman administration remains strong across Western Europe, Latin may evolve differently. Local languages would still develop, because language always changes. But Latin could remain a powerful common language for government, education, science, and diplomacy. Imagine traveling across Europe centuries later and discovering that the languages sound different from one province to another, yet government documents, universities, and international treaties still use a common Roman language. That could create an entirely different European identity. There might be no single moment called the Renaissance, because Europe would never need to rediscover Rome in quite the same way. Instead, classical knowledge would have remained part of a continuous intellectual tradition. Roman scholars could study Aristotle without believing they were recovering a forgotten world. Engineers could examine ancient Roman construction methods because those methods would belong to their own living tradition. Artists could study Roman sculpture without excavating it from the ground. And historians would not look at ancient Rome as a vanished civilization. They would look at it as their ancestors' world. That psychological difference could be enormous. A modern Roman citizen might walk through a building that is 2,000 years old and know that it was not preserved as a ruin. It was repaired, rebuilt, expanded, and continuously used. The Forum would not simply represent the past, it would be part of the present. The roads would not simply be archaeological discoveries, some of their routes could still shape modern transportation. The legal traditions of Rome might influence modern courts in ways even stronger than they already do today, and Roman citizenship could become one of the world's most recognizable political identities. But the empire would also face challenges that ancient rulers could never have imagined: industrialization, mass politics, printing, electricity, railways, telecommunications, air travel, nuclear weapons, space exploration. A civilization can survive political collapse. Surviving technological revolutions is much harder. Rome would have to change again and again. The Industrial Revolution might transform the balance of power between provinces. Coal-rich regions could suddenly become strategically important. Railways could make distant provinces easier to control, but also make rebellion easier to organize. Mass newspapers could challenge imperial propaganda. Radio could connect millions of citizens to political movements. The internet could make Roman borders almost meaningless. And eventually, Rome would face the same question every long-lasting political system faces. Can an institution created thousands of years ago adapt to a world that no longer resembles the world that created it? Perhaps the emperor becomes ceremonial. Perhaps the Senate becomes a modern parliament. Perhaps provinces become autonomous states inside a Roman federation. Or perhaps the empire fragments at a much later date, creating a political crisis in the modern era. That final possibility is important, because the most believable alternate history is not one where Rome becomes immortal. It is one where Rome survives long enough to become something fundamentally different. The Roman Empire of the 21st century would probably not look like the empire of Caesar or Augustus. It might not even look recognizably ancient. Its buildings could be modern. Its technology could be modern. Its citizens could speak dozens of languages. Its political institutions could resemble a federation. Its army could use satellites, aircraft, and autonomous systems. And yet, beneath all of that, the idea of Rome could still survive. The eagle, the law, the roads, the citizenship, the institutions. The belief that an enormous and diverse world can be governed as one political community. That may be the most powerful consequence of all. Rome's greatest achievement would not be conquering more territory. It would be